Marhaban. Welcome. Welcome to the SeaWorld Research and Rescue Center. I am Dr. Elise Marquis, and I thank you all for attending this new science talk of the 2025 series. As you know, this series of science talk at the center is developed in close collaboration with the Environment Agency, Abu Dhabi, the Emirates Natural History Group, Abu Dhabi, the Natural History Museum, Abu Dhabi, and Nautica Environmental Associates. And I thank them all for helping us having such a great series, 2025 series. September is here. Many of us are looking forward to cooler days and the chance to enjoy the outdoors again. And if you're lucky, you might even spot an osprey or hear an owl in the mountains. Raptors. We will be talking about them tonight. From the sweet, sooty falcon to the commanding eagle, they embodied strength, resilience, and freedom. Over 20 countries even feature them in national emblems, including here in the UAE, home of the Hawk of Courage. Yet many face serious threats. So what's their situation, and what's being done to protect them? Well, tonight, we'll hear from two leading experts, Dr. Munir Virani and Dr. Andrew Dixon, of the Mohammed bin Zayed Raptor Conservation Fund, which drives vital research and conservation across the region and beyond. I am very proud to welcome them and to be able tonight to shine a light on their remarkable work. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to remind you a few housekeeping points. Please keep your question until the end. We will hold a Q&A session with the two speakers. And we will also ask you to avoid going in and out of the room, remain quiet during the presentation, and most importantly, switch off your phone or set it into silence. The most exciting content is right here on stage. All right, I will introduce both speakers at the same time, and then I will just go on with their presentation, and we will sit down again together at the end. Dr. Munir Virani, you will be our first speaker. Dr. Munir is globally recognized raptor expert with 3 decades of research and conservation across Africa, Asia, and beyond. An award-winning filmmaker, author, and TED Talk speaker. Yes, all that. He has published nearly 200 articles helping to identify health challenges in wild population and guide conservation strategies. He is currently the Chief Operating Officer of the Mohammed bin Zayed Raptor Conservation Fund. The second speaker will be you, Dr. Andrew Dixon. Dr. Andrew Dixon is a research biologist with over 100 publications and more, and is a pioneer in molecular and genomic approaches in raptor conservation. His work spans satellite tracking, artificial nesting, and large-scale conservation initiatives across Asia and Europe and beyond. He is the Director of Science and Conservation of the Mohammed bin Zayed Raptor Conservation Fund. And again, I am extremely proud and excited to have them both being here tonight to speak about the amazing work they are doing with the fund. So please come on stage, Dr. Munir, and have a great evening. All right.
Great. Well, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and good evening. I want to first start by thanking Dr. Elise and the YAS Rescue and Research Center and Miral Group for hosting us over here and giving us the opportunity to showcase our work. It's really fantastic to see so many of you over here. I'm particularly excited to see so many young people coming out over here. So thank you for coming. And I can assure you that at the end of this talk, both Andrew's and mine, you will certainly be inspired to do great things. And as you go out over the weekend, you'll start looking up in the skies and you'll start looking for raptors. All right, so raptors may not text or they may not tweet, but raptors have been sending us messages for millions of years. And they've been telling us messages about the health of our ecosystem, of our planet, the fragility of life, and the soaring hope that comes with every beat. And as I mentioned earlier, we hope that by the end of our talk, their journey and ours will inspire you to take flight for something greater. How do I go to the next slide? Sorry. And I need to get, this thing keeps popping up.
Ah, yes. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, just this?
Yes.
Great. All right, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge our partners, particularly the International Fund for Hubar Conservation that have really given us the space when we first started, and also the Environment Agency for their support and their funding. And also, I'd like to acknowledge and recognize the presence of our Managing Director, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Al-Kubaisi, for his leadership and vision in driving us where we are today. So I'm going to start by asking a question here in the audience. How many of you have come from outside the UAE and are living here as expats? Okay, right. So just like the majority of you in this room, the Seika falcon is also a migrant. And it crosses borders without visas, following ancient routes that have been carved in the sky, from the steppes of Mongolia to the plateau, the Tibetan plateau in China. Now I want you to picture the Mongolian steppes. These are vast, they're empty, and they're endless. It is a flat ocean of grass. And sometimes when you're standing there, you feel like the heavens are playing a cosmic joke. They're playing a cosmic joke because it's unimaginable to believe that in a place like this, a single power line or a single pole can bring down one of the fastest, fiercest hunters on the planet. Our research team was surveying this landscape when they stopped. Frozen. And there, beneath a pole, was a magnificent creature. Wings spread wide, forever still, dead. This was X-26, a female Seika falcon. Seika falcons are endangered species. This bird was electrocuted, but her story doesn't end here. 10 miles away, in an artificial nest that we had built, there were 4 chicks that waited, they were tired, and they were hungry. They didn't know that the mother would never return. Her mate, this is X-48, against every instinct, against every evolutionary program, he stepped in. And day after day, hunt after hunt, this male falcon hunted alone, and he fed 4 hungry mouths. Today, all 4 chicks are alive because one falcon refused to give up. That single act of defiance mirrors the choice we face in conservation today. While we're sitting in this room, here's what's happening whilst we're sitting in this room. Every 3 seconds, a bird dies from electrocution around the world. That's 10 million birds a year. This is not a distant problem. This is a global emergency. And just like X-26's mate, we have a choice. We can surrender to this tragedy, or we can step in and do something about it. Well, I'm privileged to say that Abu Dhabi has stepped in and stepped up and is doing something about it through the Mohammed bin Zayed Raptor Conservation Fund. That's where we come in. We were founded in 2018 by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the United Arab Emirates. And our goal was to develop transformative and innovative conservation solutions to address key threats that raptors are facing across the globe. Our vision is to ensure that raptors and their habitats are conserved, and they remain as vital elements of regional and global biodiversity. Our mission is to catalyze and facilitate global collaborative programs and support the conservation and the restoration of raptors and their habitat. We work through a 4-pillar conservation approach. Our first is we're focused to save species, particularly those that are in peril. All our conservation and management decisions, every act that we do is based on sound scientific research. That's our second pillar. We pride ourselves in developing global partnerships across the globe, and you will see with the partnerships that we have across the globe. And most critically, we also pride ourselves in developing the next generation of conservation leaders. And maybe one of you young people sitting out over here will be one of those voices for raptors in the United Arab Emirates. 4 years ago, when I first joined, we had 2 projects around the world. We were working in Mongolia. That was our signature project, and Andrew will be talking about that. And we were working in Bulgaria, where we were captive breeding and releasing Seika falcons in the wild, where they had gone extinct in the early part of 2000. Today, on behalf of the fund, I'm very proud to say that we're working in 9 regions across the globe. And I will be talking about some of these programs that we work across the globe, and I'm sure you'll find those very exciting. But I think for the benefit, especially of the young people over here, is to first understand, because we're the Raptor Conservation Fund, what exactly is a raptor? And if one of you said it's a dinosaur, then you're not very wrong, because raptors did evolve from dinosaurs. But if you said it was a Ford Ranger, then you were completely wrong. So raptors are characterized mainly by 3 things, as a general rule. They have forward-facing eyes, they have very sharp talons or claws, and they have a hooked beak for tearing flesh. And there are different types of raptors. We've got eagles, we've got vultures, we've got harriers, there are hawks, there are fish eagles and snake eagles, there are owls. There's a new one that's come into the club of raptors. It's called the Seriyama. It's found in South America. We've got kestrels, and we've got falcons. Across the globe, there's 557 species of raptors, of which half are mainly diurnal, which means they are active during the day, and the other half are nocturnal. The largest of the raptors is the Andean condor, found in South America, which weighs about 15 kilos. And the smallest one is the black-thighed falconet, which weighs about 40 grams. So there's a wide disparity and diversity amongst them. So why do raptors matter? They matter because they are the pulse of the ecosystem. They tell us about the integrity and the health of ecosystems. Vultures are nature's cleanup crew. They prevent disease outbreaks and cycles. They recycle nutrients. They even help in reducing greenhouse gases. Owls and hawks, they save farmers billions of dollars by controlling rodents. And falcons keep migratory birds and insects in check as well. Whereas birds like condors and eagles have always been ingrained in culture and inspiration throughout millennia. But here's the thing. Of these 557 raptors across the globe, 1 out of 5 is threatened with extinction. And that means if we don't intervene and do all that it takes to save a species, then they're going to go. And when they go, they're lost forever. So I'm going to briefly talk about some of the international programs that we're working on right now. I'm not going to go through all this. You can just see the pretty pictures there on the right. And hopefully you'll get a sense. So I'm going to take you across a journey across the world, okay? I'll start off first in Madagascar. All of you are familiar with this site. If you've watched Madagascar, you know this is the Alley of the Baobabs. And it is here where the entire global population, or at least in Madagascar in the southern part, the entire global population of sooty falcons congregates. They breed in the Arabian Peninsula. They breed off the coast in the Red Sea. They breed in Eritrea, in Libya, in Chad. But in the winter, all of them go to Madagascar. So this is where we spent in March. And I was there with a team from the Peregrine Fund, who are our partners. The sooty falcon is there on the left. It's about a quarter of the size of the Seika falcon. And we worked through this place. It was hot, it was rainy, there were mosquitoes. We were getting bitten all the time. It was humid. But that's the field work that we absolutely love and die for. We were very fortunate. We were able to trap and tag 9 sooty falcons. The idea was to collect a blood sample. And again, I want to thank Dr. Elise and the Yas Rescue and Research Center because they're very kindly and generously storing our tissue samples until we can do some genomics work. So we had a really good team. That's the sooty falcon on the far right. And I want to thank Mr. Maurice Janeke, who's sitting here in the audience, for that fantastic photo that he took and has shared with us, which is also in our annual report. So this is basically, after we left Madagascar in March, this is the movements that the birds took. You can see they left Madagascar, they crossed the Mozambique Channel, they went into Tanzania, into Kenya, sort of into Ethiopia, Eritrea. One bird went into Chad, others into Egypt. We've got some anomaly readings over there with one somewhere near Kazakhstan and one in Vietnam. Please ignore those because those are completely wrong. But I want to draw your attention to this one particular bird. This is 479. It sent a signal this morning as well. And it left Madagascar, went through these countries, crossed the Red Sea, went right past Abu Dhabi, and is currently nesting on the islands of Musandam in Oman. It went up to Iran and came back. Now you can see the photos on the right. One of our colleagues, Mr. Mohammed Saleh, got so excited, he went out to Oman on a boat, and he took these photos. And you can see the bird on the far right there. You can just about see its satellite transmitter on its back. So this bird is out there. It's probably nesting. And inshallah, come October, November, they will start making the journey back to Madagascar. So it's very exciting. The sooty falcon has completely disappeared from Abu Dhabi. We don't know why. And in the long term, we are looking towards developing a strategy to return the sooty falcon back to Abu Dhabi. All right, from Madagascar, I will now take you to the jungles of Mindanao in the Philippines, where the most incredible bird of prey called the Philippine eagle resides. The bird on the left here, it used to be called the Philippine monkey-eating eagle. It's about the size of that chair that you see over there. It's a massive bird. It's critically endangered. There's only about maybe 250 to 300 birds left in the wild. And the Mohammed bin Zayed Raptor Conservation Fund was approached for this. And we signed an agreement with the Philippine Eagle Foundation to do a pilot release of 10 birds from Mindanao to another island called Leyte, where they used to occur prior to 2013, when a huge typhoon destroyed the entire island and wiped out all the birds there. So this is our second year. I was there in May this year. We released 2 birds. We released 2 birds the previous year. So there were 4 out there. Unfortunately, one died. It crash landed into the ocean. But we're working very closely. You know, this is all learning experiences. The 2 birds that we released in May are doing really well. The idea is to have them to breed and have a self-sustaining population over there. And I'm going to share this photo with you because I was sitting up on a platform as they were releasing this bird in May, and it was the most moving and incredible experience. The hind talon of this bird is about 4.5 inches, and it is larger than that of a grizzly bear. This is a killing machine. So just watch it as it leaves. Yeah, that was a historical moment. And again, this is the legacy from Abu Dhabi that's giving conservation back to raptors across the globe. So the bird, Sinabadan, she was the female. You know, she left 1.5 hours later. The male left within 5 seconds. She stayed for an hour and a half until she was really forced to go out. She went and perched on a tree. You can see the transmitter on her back, and it's just very few visuals come close to watching a wild Philippine eagle. All right, so from Philippines, I want to take you to the SeaWorld Peninsula in Alaska, where we have a program and a project with the Peregrine Fund, and they're looking at the impacts of climate change on one of the most charismatic falcons in the world, and that's the gyrfalcon. So you see the gyrfalcon on the far right with a brood of nestlings, and we're basically, we're calling this the Polar Raptors and the Gyrfalcon project. And this is building on a 22-year study that the Abu Dhabi first provided the seed money way back in the early 2000s to set this program up. So we're looking at how climate change is affecting the nesting and survival and feeding behavior of the geofalcon, but we're also looking and assessing the impacts of climate change on 6 other Patagonian raptors, which is in South America. We're looking at these species over here, all these species over here. I'm not going to go through them all, but particularly wanted to mention the striated caracara and the white-throated caracara. The striated caracara is on the Falkland Islands. But basically, the take-home message from this is that across Alaska's Arctic, the extreme weather is cutting geofalcon nestling survival. It's very low. And also, they were looking at other species like golden eagles, where there's 70% reduction in production of chicks. And this is clear evidence of climate change in action. The striated caracara that you see on the bottom right over there is a species that's least concern, which means there's no real conservation intervention. But it's a species that's now, the models are showing us that it's being affected by climate change as well, just like many other birds within the polar and the South Pole region. So from the Seward Peninsula, I want to take you now to Africa. This is Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique. It is described as the model national park. I want you to imagine Mozambique was torn with civil strife and civil war. This entire landscape was filled with landmines, and one individual and the government of Mozambique committed themselves to making this into a national park. They introduced hundreds of animals in there, if not thousands. And this place is the largest stronghold for Africa's most critically endangered vulture, which is the white-headed vulture you see over here. It's an incredible bird. This place remains as a stronghold. So we started a project there 2 years ago, working with local rangers and local communities. We want to look and identify what are the threats to the white-headed vulture and how we can maintain Gorongosa National Park as a stronghold for this very vital and important species. And we're going to build and publish our work on existing data on the movement and the breeding for the white-headed vulture. In addition to that, Rebecca, who's our project manager over there, is working with local Mozambicans. So the idea is to develop conservation leadership so that in the future, people like Raul over here and Diolindo can then become the champions and the voices for these raptors in Gorongosa National Park. Okay, from Mozambique, I want to take you now to a place that's very dear to my heart. This is in the central states of India. This is Kipling country, the jungles of Bandhavgarh National Park, where we've got species. This is called the Indian long-billed vulture. Again, it's listed as critically endangered because that means if there's no human intervention, the species is going to go extinct. 5 Asian vulture species were affected. Some of you may be familiar with an event that took place from the mid-1990s. Populations of these 5 vultures collapsed by as much as 99% over a very short period of time. And we didn't know what was killing it. And it took us 3 years to find out what did it. And it turned out to be a pain-killing drug called diclofenac that was being injected to livestock. When the vultures were feeding on contaminated carcasses, they would die of kidney failure. Thanks to the efforts of organizations that worked on this, including the Bombay Natural History Society and a whole consortium of other organizations working there, diclofenac was banned in 2006. And if you look at the graph on your right, you can see the vulture populations are slowly starting to come back. So this is one of the biggest success stories in sort of modern raptor conservation. A very important point from here is that the dramatic decline of these vultures, primarily due to the drug diclofenac, led to a significant increase in feral dog populations. And the number of cases of rabies went up 500%. India was spending $1.5 billion a year to treat rabies for a service that vultures were doing for free. These are nature's cleanup crews, and they help prevent the spread of diseases. So after a period when I joined the Mohammed bin Zayed Raptor Conservation Fund, we had the blessing from our leadership and the vision to go out there and continue collecting the information that's vital. So until 2016, we didn't know what was going on. We reignited these studies, went back last year to monitor the populations. And you can see the top graph shows that the population has still remained stable, which is a good sign. But if you look at the two lines at the bottom, one, the red line shows the population increase in one of the states, which is Madhya Pradesh, and the lower line shows a decrease in the population in the other neighboring state, which is called Rajasthan. And that is related to the toxicity of the drugs that are sold in India. So if you look at the graph on the right, the state of Rajasthan sells significantly higher doses of toxic drugs for vultures than Madhya Pradesh. So this probably explains that discrepancy. So I'm going to close now and have Andrew come and talk. But before I go, I would really urge you to, we've kept some annual reports and some brochures out over there for you to pick up for your reading pleasure. Please, please follow us on Instagram, check out our website, and sign up for our newsletter. And I want to close by saying that the story I said in the start about X26 and her 4 chicks, you remember her, right? Her story reminds us that conservation is never ending and that every bird matters. Her story we cannot ignore, and it's thanks to the visionary leadership of Abu Dhabi and the legacy that they have in global raptor conservation that these stories are now being transformed into hope. In fact, the mere fact of finding X26 led us to a power line that we are now going to mitigate. You know, this is way past all the mitigation efforts we've done, and Andrew's going to be talking a little bit about that. But the work that's been done in Mongolia is historic. It is without a doubt the single largest conservation story of our time to save a species. So on that note, I will ask Andrew to come and give us his very powerful story on artificial nest sites. But there's a QR code over here, and Andrew will have it also at the end of his talk. If you sign up to our newsletter, you have a chance to win a very exciting prize. So, thank you.
Thank you, Munir. I've got the unenviable task of following on from Munir, who's a very good speaker. Now you see the opposite side of that for part B of the talk. Munir gave you the broad overview of the work of the Mohammed bin Zayed Raptor Conservation Fund. And what I'm going to do is to focus down to what we're doing on one particular species, which is the Saker falcon, and in one particular area in Mongolia, and a specific aspect of conservation management that we're employing there, and that's the deployment of artificial nests. So before I talk about that, I'd really like to say, to get some understanding of why we should conserve the Saker falcon. What's the value that we place on this species? And we can think of the Saker as having 3 different types of value. One is its intrinsic value in its right to exist on Earth without any reference to human values at all. And that could be considered its IUN global red list status. It's an endangered species, which means it's a very high risk of extinction. So it has some intrinsic value in that this bird is close to extinction. But it also has a value to humans in terms of its cultural value, especially in Arabian falconry. It's a very important bird for Arabian falconry. And because of its falconry heritage, now in the present day in the Arabian Peninsula, but also historically in the time of the Khans through Mongolia, this bird is a national symbol for countries like the UAE, Hungary, and Mongolia. And it's no coincidence that the 3 countries where the most work on the Saker falcon is done is in the UAE, Hungary, and Mongolia. That shows the importance of the cultural value of the species in terms of its conservation. And we can also think of the Saker as having a much more mundane utilitarian value. It's a sort of workhorse. It does something for the benefit of humans in terms of its ecosystem services. It provides pest control for management of grasslands and so on. So we can think of the Saker as having these 3 values, and we can use these levers to drive conservation work for the species. So just to give you some background on the distribution and population trends of the species, this little inset on the top shows you the distribution of the Seika in the 19th century. And that red area was its breeding distribution. And it had a large continuous breeding distribution that extended all the way from Central Europe right the way across to Eastern Mongolia and Eastern China. So it's a very large contiguous distribution right across Eurasia. But once we move into the 20th century, that's changed. So you can see the black outline was its old previous distribution, and the darker reddish areas are its current breeding areas, and the yellow areas are where it's now a vagrant or just a passage bird. And these declines started at different times. It started in the West early on, primarily after the First World War, and the decline in Europe was mainly brought about by habitat change, removing natural steppe grassland ecosystems to develop agriculture. There was also the problems of persecution, but essentially the reason it disappeared from Europe was loss of habitat. And this process was more or less complete by World War II, the mid-1950s. The populations crashed down to very small numbers, and now we have perhaps 400 to 500 pairs of Seika falcons in the whole of Europe. As we go further east, the population decline occurred in Russia, between the Don and the Volga rivers of Russia. This was a large steppe area where there used to be Saiga antelopes at that time. All that got removed with agricultural development during the Soviet era, and the Seika falcons disappeared from this area too. Now, following this habitat change, and also there was the use of pesticides during the Soviet period, and during the late 50s and 60s and 70s, oil wealth started to appear in the Gulf regions. Seika falcons had a monetary value to be traded in falconry, and the birds from this area migrated mainly down to the Arabian Peninsula, so a lot of these birds were trapped in the Middle East. So the major factors for the decline of the birds there was habitat loss, pesticides, and trapping. As we come through towards the end of the last century, the decline was very prominent in Kazakhstan from the 1990s onwards, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And again, we had large-scale habitat change across Kazakhstan, and the opening up of this area, which allowed trappers to move into the breeding grounds of the Seika falcon and trap the breeding birds at their breeding sites. So we've had a decline in the population of Seikas in Kazakhstan from maybe 5,000 to 10,000 pairs, now to maybe less than 1,000 pairs. So you can see across this range, there's a steady decline from west to east. And what we have in the east now, in the Tibetan Mongolo Plateau areas, is the only extant contiguous breeding population of Seika falcons. And this population, thankfully, is at the moment stable and possibly even increasing, with an estimated 15,000 to 25,000 pairs breeding in that area. So when we're looking at conserving the Seika falcon, we can engage in proactive conservation, trying to maintain and make sure that this population is healthy, and we can engage in reactive conservation, trying to restore the populations of the birds that have already declined. Proactive conservation is much, much easier than reactive conservation. And one example of proactive conservation is the use of artificial nests. So as Mania said earlier about the grasslands of Mongolia, there are large rolling plains of grasslands. It doesn't look much like grassland, it's mainly brown most of the time you see it. It doesn't look very productive, but this is grass. And the grasslands are flat or rolling, and there's lots of food in this habitat. There are lots of larks and small rodents, huge numbers of potential prey species for Seika falcons, but nowhere for them to nest. So we say that the population is nest site limited. That means the upper ceiling of the population is limited by the availability of nest sites. If there are not many nest sites, you can't get many Seika falcons. So the simple solution is to give them some nest sites. You put up a nest, and the birds will use it. And anecdotally, I know that Seika falcons have occupied a nest that we put up within a matter of hours. They've gone past, put the box up, gone up the line, done some more boxes, come back down, and there's a pair of Seika falcons sitting on the one we've done earlier, before the cement is even set in the ground. So these birds can take up these boxes very quickly. So when we set up the work to look at how Seika falcons can use artificial nests, we really needed to understand what the best type of box was for them. So we set out the trial of 4 different designs. We had 3 different types of open top boxes. We had a shallow box, a deep box, and a sloping-sided box, the idea being that the depth of the box would provide protection from the wind, but a shallow box meant the birds could look out and see predators. We wanted to know which ones they preferred. And then we had a box with a side entrance with a roof on it. What we found after the trial was that only buzzards went into the open boxes, and they filled every box. So it didn't matter whether a shallow box or deep box, they just filled them to the top. So buzzards always used the open top boxes. The other species that nested there were ravens. They went inside the boxes. And these are the two species which build stick nests. So they build nests inside the box or on the box. And the other species that nest there were the kestrel, which is a small falcon. Like all falcons, they don't build nests. They just scratch out some earth that we put in the box. And the Saker falcons. So the Saker falcons preferred the boxes with a side entrance. So we knew that if we were going to put lots of boxes out, we needed side entrance boxes. If we wanted to encourage buzzards to nest, we put something on the top so they could sit their nest on the top. The other thing that our trial showed us was that the Saker falcons that nested in nest boxes produced more chicks and bred more successfully than the Saker falcons that were in natural nest sites. These boxes provided more protection from the wind and weather conditions than most natural nest sites do. So not only could we encourage birds to breed in new areas, we'd get them to be more productive than they would be in natural sites. So then, with the funding from the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi, we set about doing a very large-scale field trial to show that we could produce Saker falcons at landscape scales in Mongolia. And we put out 5,000 artificial nests. So this little map of Mongolia shows all those little dots here on the map. This shows the area of our artificial nest grids. Each grid contains 250 nests, and each block of 250 nests was in a different district. So we had 20 districts, each with 250 nests. And these were spread across central and eastern Mongolia. And since we put these boxes up in 2010, we've had up to 1,000 pairs of Saker falcons nested in the boxes per year. And we estimate that over that period, we produced about 30,000 fledged Saker falcons from the artificial nest. So these are phenomenal numbers of birds that we can produce simply from one project in the field. So we surveyed these nests for 5 years. Once we put them up, we monitored the nest, looked and measured how many chicks they produced, how many eggs they laid, and so on. And then we wanted to see what factors affected their reproduction. And the main factor that affects the reproduction is food supply. Saker falcons can eat lots of things. They eat birds, they eat mammals, but the main bread and butter for a Saker falcon is a small mammal. And there are 3 different types of small mammal you get in the Mongolian steppe: the branch vole, the Mongolian gerbil, and the Dorian pika. And these 3 species go through erratic population cycles. They reach high peaks, then they crash and disappear, and then numbers reach high peaks again. And these cycles are not easily predictable. So that means the food supply for Sakers can vary. One year there can be loads, the next year none at all. So what we looked at is what these changes, these fluctuations in food supply have on the populations. So this graph shows you on the x-axis along the bottom is the small mammal index. So that's how many small mammals there are. So as you go from left to right, on the right-hand side, there are more mammals. On the y-axis is the breeding density, how many Sakers there are. So as you go up the y-axis, there are more Sakers. So this line shows that where there were more small mammals in the area, there were more Saker falcons, which makes sense. More food, more birds to breed in the artificial nests. Less food, less birds breed in there. We also found with the egg-laying dates that the more food there was in the area, the earlier the birds laid. Again, this makes sense. The more food, the birds can get energy to lay eggs quicker, sooner. They can lay eggs earlier in the season. And we also found that the more food there was, the more mammals, the bigger the clutch size. Again, more food, more energy, produce more eggs. Nest survival followed the same pattern. Lots of food, less likely for the nest to fail. And for the size of the chicks in the brood size produced for the nest, the more food, the more young they were. So we can see from this that the food supply, in terms of these small mammal populations, is very important for the reproductive success of the sakers. And it can vary from grid to grid, and it can vary from year to year within grids. So grids will change in terms of their productivity over time. But it's not just the food supply that affects them, it's also the climate. And this schematic shows the effects of different parts of the climate. So this P and T on the top stands for precipitation and temperature, and the 2 and 3 are the months of the year. So that's February and March. So the interaction between temperature and precipitation in the early season, in warm and dry springs, meant that the birds bred earlier. So if February and March was warm and dry, saker falcons laid their eggs earlier than if it was wet and cold. When they laid earlier, they laid more eggs. And when they laid more eggs, they produced more chicks. So there's a weather effect from the early breeding season on the productivity of the falcon as well. This little box on the bottom shows the temperature in months 4 to 6, April to June. And that's the period when they've got eggs and chicks in the nest. So when it's a warm summer, when the temperature is warmer, when they're feeding the young, they were more productive. They produced more chicks. This little box on the top that says NDVI, P48, what that means, NDVI is a measure of how much vegetation there is, and P48 is the previous year from April to August. That's the previous growing season. So what that box really says is the plant growth in the previous summer, how much grass was growing in the summer before, and when there was lots of grass, they laid earlier, bred more often, the higher densities, and again, they had higher breeding success. Now, that's not because sakers liked a lot of grass the year before. The reason is because rodents, if there's a lot of grass, they can feed on the grass, they can have lots of winter stores for grass, better overwinter survival, there are more rodents in the spring for them, and then you get more saker falcons. So the breeding biology of the saker falcon is an intimate mix of effects from environmental conditions, food supply, weather conditions, and vegetation. So there are a number of factors that affect the productivity of the sakers. So this has an important implication if we want to use saker falcons to produce sustainable harvests, for example, for falconry. Now, one of the initial motivating factors for putting up the artificial nests was because the government of Mongolia has a trade in wild saker falcons. They trap saker falcons in the wild and sell them to falconers, usually in the Arabian Peninsula, for falconry. And each falcon permit costs about $12,000. So it's not, it's not chicken feed, it's falcon feed. There's a lot of money in this for them. So the government run this trade, but the problem with this trade is that they didn't really have any way of showing that there was no detriment on the wild population. Now, it's a CITES-regulated trade, and they need to show a non-detriment finding. So one of the ways that they could do that, we were thinking, is that we could use artificial nests, and they could set a sustainable harvest quota based on the productivity of artificial nests. Unfortunately, that never happened. The government didn't engage for a number of reasons, but this is not something we're really going to give up on, because they still sell falcons, but they just don't link that sale of falcons to artificial nests. The Global Action Plan for the Conservation of the Saker Falcon, which was drawn up by the Raptors MOU for the Convention of Migratory Species, has within it a management plan for the sustainable use of saker falcons, to show how this sustainable use can drive the conservation of the species. So sustainable use and conservation can work together. And it's possible that maybe sometime in the future, if there's government willingness, they could use artificial nests as a basis for setting a sustainable harvest quota. And we could use integrated population modeling, which could take into account all things like food supply and so on, to give good annual quotas that would reflect the productivity of the population. But as yet, that's not happened, but it's a possibility. So given that this was one of the main reasons we wanted to put up artificial nests at the start of the project, now we have to think, what other reasons can we put them up? Because this is not working. So one of the things we could look at is the role that the artificial nest can play in grassland management. And this is the form of pest control. So this is a map of Mongolia, and the red areas are degraded grasslands. And you look at it, there's a lot of red there. Green are healthy grasslands or healthy vegetation areas, and yellow are degraded. The redder it is, the more heavily degraded. And the reason these grasslands are degraded, primarily because of two things. One is climate change, and climate change especially in prolonged periods of drought in Mongolia. And the other is overgrazing, because of increases in livestock herd sizes, and also the change in composition of the herds, with more goats being present in the herds than there were previously because of the demand for, what's that stuff called? Cashmere, that's one. I've always got to buy something for my wife when I go to Mongolia. So the problem with rodents is that rodents really like degraded grasslands. Rodents like short grass and sparse grasslands, and that is what you get in degraded grasslands. So the more degraded the grasslands become, the better the habitat is for these rodents, and you get these population outbreaks. The rodents are herbivorous, so they also eat the grass, and they burrow, break up the soil, and they really advance this process of desertification. They exacerbate the effects of climate change and overgrazing, so they make things worse. So what we can do is to look at using artificial nests to control the rodents to ameliorate these impacts. So intuitively, you think Saker falcons, birds of prey, they eat rodents, they must be good for grasslands. But actually nobody's really proven that eating rodents reduces rodent populations, or that eating rodents does anything to benefit the grasslands. So this is one of the things that we're looking at to scientifically demonstrate some impact on rodent populations. We're also looking at something called the landscape of fear. And the landscape of fear is the idea that rodents adjust their behavior in relation to their risk of predation. So if you're a rodent, you spend less time on the surface of the ground if you're at high risk of being eaten by a bird of prey. If there are no birds of prey, then you just spend your time wandering about on the surface, eating as much grass as you like. So we put little tiny Bluetooth trackers on the rodents, and we track the amount of time they spend on the surface, when they're on the surface, and so on. So this is part of our project at the moment. And this map, this graph at the end shows the top graph, the little peaks, show that the rodents are most active just after dawn and dusk. And the bottom bar chart shows when Saker falcons bring rodents back to the nest to feed the chicks. And we can see there's a coincidence between the time when Saker falcons bring food back and when rodents are more active. When rodents are running about on the surface, Sakers are catching them and taking them back for the chicks. Another reason for putting up artificial nests is that the productivity of artificial nests bought us some time to work on what was a real conservation problem in Mongolia, which is electrocution, which Munir mentioned earlier. This picture has been shown many times now. This shows the number of dead birds, mostly Saker falcons, found along one power line in Mongolia when we were doing the surveys. And the problem is caused by these distribution lines, which are made from concrete posts with metal cross arms. And what that means is when the bird stands on the post or the metal cross arm, and if it touches the wire, it's grounded. The electricity runs to earth, bang, the bird's dead. So you can see the hole in the head of that Saker there, where it's perched on the top of the pole and the top of its head touched the wire. So this is known as phase-to-ground electrocution. And it's a very simple thing to prevent. Simple to prevent by not putting these lines up like this in the first place, but that's another issue. But even when they're up, there are ways that we can fix the problem. And it's a matter of putting insulation on the top of the pole or on the cross arm to prevent the earthing of the bird if it touches the wire. And we did that in Mongolia. We successfully put this mitigation on over 27,000 poles in Mongolia. And what was estimated to be 4,000 Saker falcons electrocuted each year is now down to about 200 that we estimate electrocuted each year. Still an ongoing problem, and something that we need to address continually, really, in Mongolia. But what the artificial nest did was meant that this massive mortality rate was buffered. We were bought time by producing birds in the artificial nest at the same time. Another value and role of the artificial nest is for research. And for capacity building in Mongolia, and again, Munir mentioned that one of our pillars is to develop the next generation of conservationists. And artificial nests are a fantastic research tool. You can get very large sample sizes. You know, there's not many areas where you can work on birds of prey and get large samples, because birds of prey are normally very widely dispersed, so you get large sample sizes, easy to get data. You get standardized data. They're all breeding in the same sort of habitat, so you can control for many factors. They're accessible, so you don't have the logistic problems of traveling miles up on the mountainsides and so on, so they reduce the costs of research. So it's a very good research tool, a good resource for researchers. And we have a little research station now set up at one of our artificial nest sites. And the staff that we employ in Mongolia who are doing our research with us, most of those are, we've got 2 postdoctoral researchers there, but we've got PhD students, MSc students, and we've also one who's still doing their degree. But all these people are learning and training whilst doing the job. So they're not, up to one side, just training. These are hands-on practitioners in the field and getting their qualifications as they work. And we've had international students come to our study station. 7 people have completed their masters during our project work. 1 person has completed a PhD. So all this has sort of contributed towards capacity building in Mongolia. And we've also, of course, funded several Mongolian conservation non-profit organizations. So we give people employment. It's not just training, but also employment after the training. And people can work on a number of things like satellite tracking. We have video cameras at the nest to look at the diet and things like studying the pellets and so on with the birds. So there's a wide range of projects that people can undertake. So it's a fantastic resource for research. It's also a good resource for education, not just higher education, but for schools. And we had a school links project associated with the artificial nests. Every one of the communities, the 20 districts where we had the artificial nests, we had programs within the schools. We had art competitions, poetry competitions. We had lessons in biology about steppe ecology and so on. And the kids produced calendars, and they all took them back to the family gears. All the gears had the calendar with information. So we got the message out about what the project was about and so on. So there was a lot of community outreach there. Each school in the district, we take them out to the grids, we show them the nest, so we had field trips out to the countryside for them. We would take information brochures around to the herders that were on the grids. And in some of the areas where we were making nests, there was employment for people to actually make the barrels and make the nests. So there was a large community involvement, not just education, but outreach and employment associated with the artificial nests. And finally, we're looking for other utilitarian roles for artificial nests. And there's one thing that we may well be developing in Kazakhstan, is the role for artificial nests in protecting transmission power line infrastructure. So the nasty distribution lines which electrocute Seika falcons, we don't want to help them. But these transmission lines, they don't kill Seika falcons. They provide nesting sites for them. But one of the problems is in places like Mongolia and Kazakhstan, in the steppes, there's not much nesting material, so the birds use any trash and wire that they find. And this trash and wire can blow in the wind and then get tangled up in the live conductor phases and cause outages and power shorting and so on. So it's a threat to the integrity of the transmission line distribution of electricity. So by putting up artificial nests, we can prevent nest-building species building nests in dangerous parts of the line. We can put the nests below the conductors or on the pole where they can nest safely and not interfere with the line. Another role for artificial nests is a way of monitoring zoonotic diseases. Here we're testing for avian influenza in Seika falcons. We sampled a large area quite easily and quickly for avian influenza. But there's lots of other diseases you could look for and monitor using artificial nests. Artificial nests can be used to monitor things like terrestrial pollution levels. There's a lot of mining in Mongolia. Mining produces dust. Dust is heavy in, it's got a lot of heavy metals in it. These heavy metals settle out on the grass. Herbivores eat the grass. Predators eat the herbivores. And so you get accumulation of heavy metals in the predators. By sampling feathers or tissue samples from birds in artificial nests, we can look at levels of pollutants across the Mongolian grasslands. And it's analogous. A brant's foal eats some grass, the saker eats a brant foal. A sheep eats the grass, a human eats the sheep. So we can look at these effects of heavy metal pollutants which have relevance to people in Mongolia. So given all these different ideas we've got for saying why we should put up artificial nests, we now really need to develop our project. And since we put up 5,000 nests in 2010, that was, 15 years ago, we've probably got about 1,000 nests left. The nests disappear. They disappear for a number of reasons. Some people take them and use them for building materials. You can see they're using the posts here for a winter shelter. They flatten the boxes out and put them against walls as wind barriers. They collected a load of them and tried to sell them for scrap metal. Some of the boxes over time just decay and break down. Others are pushed over because animals scratch on them. Horses and camels are a real menace pushing the artificial nests over. So there's a degradation of the boxes over time. They need to be monitored and managed in order to make sure they are functional for a long period. So we're looking at developing some new boxes, and we've designed some flat pack plastic nest boxes. Flat pack makes them easy to transport and set up. Actually, it's a real logistic nightmare to try and transport barrels and metal poles around, but these flat pack boxes hopefully will make that easier and cheaper for us. The plastic boxes are more durable than the metal cans. The plastic won't break down because of urea in the droppings of the birds. So we're going to trial some of these now. Hopefully they don't blow apart in the winter winds in Mongolia, which is what we're going to test this winter. But if they're successful and the nests are still standing in the spring, then this is probably the way forward for us now in the future of artificial nests in Mongolia. So I'll leave you with this one, these artificial nests. Simple structure, but highly effective. We've pulled all the chicks out of this box, but there are 7 chicks in here, which is an enormously productive nest. So it's a fantastic way for managing the species, for conservation management. We're working with our partner in Mongolia, which is the Mongolian Bird Conservation Center, and we're doing this under an MOU with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic. I loved every minute of it. Come over. We are going to sit here. I'm going to give you one, and we're going to take.
Please don't forget to scan the QR code for a chance to win an exciting prize.
Sorry. Whoop, whoop. And yes. All right, we're going to take the first question, and it will be one question per person, please, so that we can have more people speaking. At the back over there, yes. Do we have a microphone going on? Yes. Thank you, Matt.
Good evening. My question is specifically about behavior and ecology. Why do some raptors migrate while others stay in one place? Thank you.
That's a very good question. Yes.
That's a tricky question, one which we're trying to address in Mongolia. The saker falcon The saker falcon is what's known as a partially migratory species. So some sakers in Mongolia migrate down to the Tibetan plateau, and some stay in Mongolia, and we don't know why. But for other species that we've tracked, like the peregrines in the Arctic, then it's very obvious why they migrate. It's because their food migrates, they feed mainly on wading birds, and they disappear for the winter in the Arctic. So a lot of birds migrate because they're moving from an area where their prey populations are also migrating due to changes in seasonal climate. But in the case of the saker falcon, we don't really know why some migrate and some don't. It may be genetic, it may be environmental, it may be a combination of genetics and environment where their behavior can be modified under particular conditions.
No, I think he's answered it well.
that one question kind of, I don't like it that much. So I've heard of birds that lay their eggs in other birds' nests so that they take care of them and no work for them. Are there any falcons or species of raptors that do this?
No, so you're thinking of cuckoos, and that's a very specialized reproductive strategy. There are a number of birds that also dump eggs in the nest, but that doesn't happen in raptors as far as I'm aware. But what you do sometimes get with Saker falcons is that they don't build their own nests, but they steal nests from other birds. Now, they can take an old nest, or they can take a nest which a bird is currently using. And we've had a couple of cases where they steal a nest from a buzzard, and the buzzard's already laid an egg or two, and the Saker falcons haven't bothered to kick the eggs out. They just leave them there, lay their eggs on top, and then they hatch their own eggs and the buzzard's eggs. And they rear the buzzards and the Sakers in the same nest. So it's not the same strategy, it's sort of an accident, but they do sometimes rear other species because of that.
Amazing. All right. I think if we stay on the same side, yes, we have.
Thank you. Your presentations were very interesting. I'm curious about the gyrfalcon. So you mentioned that climate change is impacting polar raptors negatively. The Arctic and Antarctica, they're growing warmer. Wouldn't that mean it would be a less extreme environment for them?
That's a good question, and I commend you on your kind of thought process. What's happening is these birds, gyrfalcons, are very well adapted to sort of the tundra in the Arctic region. And what's happening now is that the permafrost is melting much earlier. And instead of extremely cold periods, you're getting precipitation, right? So you could have gyrfalcons laying their eggs in, what originally is a historic nest site, and then suddenly the permafrost is melting, and you've got small chicks that actually drown. So that really is the problem, that these are, they're getting wet, and females are literally incubating eggs in a pool of water. So that's the real problem. And it's also affecting their prey cycles. They feed on ground squirrels and ptarmigans. And what we're seeing with climate change is that we're having completely erratic cycles of prey availability.
And just to follow up on that, would that maybe those new conditions will be more favorable to some other species coming from the south? Or?
It's very possible. There have been some cases where people are starting to see peregrine falcons replacing gyrfalcon sites because they're kind of more adapted to less harsh conditions than gyrfalcons. So some species will do well, and others that are extremely adapted to those particular temperatures, they will suffer.
Thank you. All right. Do we have a question on this side? Yes, Claudia.
Yeah, so I have a question regarding the eagles that are migratory to the UAE. Do you have any projects to follow up or protect these eagles that are coming on autumn-winter migration to the UAE, for example, the greater spotted eagle that is endangered?
Yeah, good question. Currently, all our programs are focused outside the UAE, and I know the Environment Agency is really spearheaded and they're championing some of the work that's being done here on eagles. Shaquille from the Environment Agency, I know he's been doing some work on greater spotted eagles and osprey. So there is work that's being done here. It's just we're not, the Environment Agency are our partners, but the main focus of our work is outside the UAE.
Yeah, but I think the breeding areas of greater spotted eagle are not inside the UAE. It's different to the osprey, or here we have clear this is the job of EAD, and they are doing a great job because we have a fantastic population. but what about the eagles and other raptors like the sooty falcon? The sooty falcon you mentioned, it's not here anymore, and we want to know why and bring it back. But we also have eagles that are breeding outside and that we value here in the UAE as migrants. And so my question is, what is done for their protection? This needs to be done outside the UAE, not inside, because they are not breeding here.
Sure, there are organizations that are involved. There's the Andrew was at the Palearctic Eagles meeting. It was last year, the year before. Yes, so there are organizations out there that are doing exceptional work. Our priority right now are on those particular species that that are within our 5-year plan for now, and also we're looking at those species. We are prioritizing those species that require the most urgent conservation intervention. So we are currently looking at working on a program for the secretary bird, for example, in Africa. This is, an iconic species. It's declining at a very alarming rate, and we are working also with very credible partners to put in our resources. And again, we're a very small team. We were only established in 2018, and inshallah, we will aspire at some point where our overall vision is to see that all raptors thrive and soar, so that the next generation can enjoy them.
I'm just looking at Umberto over there. Umberto is managing the Raptor MOU. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thank you.
Can you introduce yourself first?
Yeah, I'm Umberto Gallorsi. I'm the head of the coordinating unit of the Memorandum of Understanding for the Conservation of Migratory Birds of Prey in Africa and Eurasia, which is an international agreement under the Convention of Migratory Species. And for what concerns the eagles, well, we are now developing a steppe eagle action plan, which is exactly looking at the threats across the range from Kazakhstan, where they breed in large numbers, across the peninsula where they actually pass and now start breeding, all the way to Africa. So there are initiatives to address the threats well outside. For the eagle, the steppe eagle, for example, one of the big issues is electrocution, and the Convention of Migratory Species has also an energy task force looking at how to address electrocution, which will benefit not only sacred falcons, steppe eagles, because unfortunately electrocution is the largest human cause of mortality for large birds. And this is a very common threat that we don't really realize how deadly are all these electric power lines that bring, of course, what we have here and everywhere, but they are a very dangerous problem, and it has been completely overlooked, for example. So there are a number of initiatives by government organizations, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs working at bird conservation. There is still a lot to be done, but of course, for migratory species, we need to work together through international organizations to address the problems where they occur. Because here we might see the species declining, but the problem can be in Kazakhstan or in Syria, where they shoot them in large numbers because they pass in concentrated numbers. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, but there are things happening. That's a good thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Umberto. All right. One question over there.
Hello. So you mentioned that sacred falcons are like semi or like partially migrating species of birds, right? So would they really affect the method of artificial, the artificial nests? And if so, how potentially severe are those conundrums?
So the fact that you have permanent and transient population, how do you see that in the use of
some falcons stay in the artificial nests all year round, and others migrate. They leave the artificial nest area and spend the winter a few thousand kilometers away in China. We're looking at what effects that has on the reproductive success of the birds, because the bird which stays in the artificial nest area has the potential to breed earlier. And we know that birds that breed earlier produce more eggs, have a better nesting success. So it may be that the strategy of staying for the winter means you have a higher reproductive success. Whereas the strategy of migrating for the winter could mean that there's a lot more food available for them on the Tibetan Plateau, means you've got a better chance of surviving over winter. So there's a trade-off between migrating and increasing your chance of survival over winter than staying in a place where there's not a lot of food and it's very cold and being able to breed earlier and produce more young. So we're looking at these costs and benefits of migratory behavior for the falcons. It's also an interesting question because if we produce a lot more falcons from the artificial nests and then they all migrate to the wintering ground, we also need to know how much or what size population the wintering ground can support. Is there enough food to feed all these new migratory birds that we've created in Mongolia? So there are a number of questions that we are looking at for this program.
Amazing. All right. We have one question just here. Yes.
Thank you for your wonderful presentations and for these very important topics. I wanted to ask about the accumulation of heavy metals inside the body of raptors. Is it restricted to specific geographical areas in the world? And what are the common clinical signs which may be associated with such a condition? And according to your, or based on your point of view, what is the best solution for this? Thank you.
Yeah, so most of the work that's done on heavy metal pollution in birds has been in the marine environment. So people have been looking at seabirds, accumulation of heavy metals through the marine ecosystem. Probably people at SeaWorld know more about that than me. So birds have not really been used as monitors of terrestrial pollution of heavy metals. So this is a novel way of using artificial nests. The idea is that the heavy metals will accumulate in birds, and one of the things is that they can get rid of heavy metals in feather growth, so that we could pluck feather samples from chicks in the nest and use that as a biomarker to measure the amount of heavy metals that are in the feathers. We could use this to look at the effect of pollutions from a point source, for example. So if you have an open cast mine, and there are lots of mines in Mongolia like that, we can use artificial nests in grids around the mine, the point source, and measure the levels of pollutants as we move away from it, and we can see which areas are most affected by the dust and heavy metal pollution from that mine, relate that to prevailing winds and so on. And then we can use that information, for example, to look at the potential environmental and social effects of opening mines near urban areas or near areas where there's large communities of livestock herders. So we've not really developed this program of heavy metal testing in artificial nests. It's just one of the ways that we could use the nests and another reason for putting them up.
Can I just add to that?
Yes, of course you can.
So another very well-studied heavy metal in raptors is the use of lead as well. Lead poisoning is a serious issue. A really good example was of the California condor. In 1987, the entire California condor population in the United States were down to 22 individuals. And at that time, conservationists and US Fish and Wildlife were debating on whether to let them just die a natural death and go extinct, or whether we should take them all. Finally, sanity prevailed, and they went and captured every single California condor from 22 individuals. Today, with conservation efforts across the United States, there are over 550 California condors, of which more than half are flying in the wild. And the way lead got into these birds was through the hunting community, mainly. They would use lead ammunition to shoot deer and elk and other large game, and then they would leave the gut piles down there. Of course, the condors would come, and they were very susceptible and vulnerable to lead. And there's active programs now to work with the hunting community to switch from lead to non-lead ammunition. And it's having mixed results. It's going to take a lot of time, but over time, this is something that hopefully understanding that very low levels of lead exposure through game meat can cause developmental problems in very young children. hopefully that understanding will enable these hunters to switch from lead to non-lead ammunition.
Thank you.
Thanks. We have one question at the front, and then we'll take one more question. I have one here. Okay, that will be our last two questions. Yes.
Do the falcons eat leftovers, or do they hunt themselves?
That's a very good question.
First of all, that is a fantastic question. Thank you for asking that question. Raptors, there are mainly two types. They are hunters, like the falcons, and then there are scavengers, like vultures, for example, and some eagles. They kind of eat leftovers, but they eat the left. So if a hunter shoots an animal and it's lying dead over there, then the vultures will come and feed on them. Sometimes animals die from natural causes, and these vultures have evolved over millions of years, and they're specialized in finding carcasses. So they go down and they feed on these dead animals, which are really leftovers, and they provide a very important service. They clean up those carcasses at a very rapid rate, and they help prevent the spread of bacteria or other diseases that could affect other wildlife or humans. So thank you for asking that question.
And for the falcons, if sometimes there's leftover food in the nest, the mother will take that food and she will go and hide it somewhere nearby. And then, if there's been a long period where the mate hasn't caught any food, she'll bring those leftovers back and give them back to the chicks when they're hungry again. And I used to do that with my children. When they didn't eat all their food, I used to put it in the fridge, wait for them to be hungry, and give it them again.
Nice. All right, last question for tonight.
So my question is that you mentioned that when there was a decrease in falcons in India, the cases of rabies increased by a lot. Why is that?
So there were vultures, right? Those vultures were described in the early 70s as the most abundant large raptors in the world. There were estimates of up to 40 million birds within a small area in northern India. So because India is predominantly a Hindu country, the cow is a sacred animal. So people don't eat cows. When a cow dies, they're piled up in a carcass dump site. And so you have people that would skin the cow, and they would leave this red exposed carcass. So the vultures would come and feed on them very, very fast. And so what happened when the vulture population disappeared by 99%, there was all this food that was available. And so these feral dogs that live out on the streets, they saw that there's no competition, because vultures would feed on these carcasses and clean up a carcass within 10 to 15 minutes. Suddenly these dogs had food. So they came out there and they had food, and when you have food, they reproduce, and they produced all these other wild dogs. So the number of wild dogs went through the roof. They exploded, and there were no vultures to keep the carcasses down. So as the dog population exploded, they started to, they became a problem. They started to bite humans, and as a result, rabies shot through the roof. And that caused a lot of human deaths in India. They estimated between 500,000 and 1 million people died, not as a direct result of rabies, but as a direct result of the ecosystem services that vultures provided. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
That's amazing. Yes, even a vulture is absolutely crucial to our ecosystem and well-being, right? That's amazing. All right. Do you want a last word? Yes?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say how encouraged we are by this turnout, and especially the questions that the young students over here have asked. It's really encouraging to see that. And, both Andrew and I and anybody from the fund, please, if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to us. We have an open email policy. But I also just want to add that we've started a podcast series. It's called Talons of Hope. And it's available on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. It's available on our website as well. And we have 7 episodes, and these are really stories about champions across the globe who are doing incredible work on raptor conservation. A lot of them we partner with, but these are people out there, individuals who are doing so. Please, I would encourage you to listen to those podcasts. They come out every 2 weeks, and they're a great source of information for you all. Thank you.
That's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Munir. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrew. Again, as you said, go on the website, take the brochures, and don't hesitate to start the discussion with those incredible people and group because they're doing amazing work. Just before we close the evening, if we can have the other slide. Okay, just because we're entering a very busy period for all of us in Abu Dhabi with the IUCN World Conservation Congress starting next month, and we will have a pavilion at the exhibition, in the exhibition hall. We are sharing a pavilion with the Alain Zoo. So if you're looking for us, we're in the exhibition hall. Come to see us at the SeaWorld Research and Rescue Center, and we will have talks and we will have a lot of nice things to discuss about. Just not for everyone, that there is a free access to the exhibition on the 10th, 11th, and 12th of October on the morning, and the 13th all day is free and accessible to all. So it's really, I will encourage every one of you to go and attend that Congress. We are very lucky to have it here in Abu Dhabi. And just for a bit more fun, maybe, we have the 2025 One Ocean Photo Contest starting on the 7th of October. You can't see the date properly. It's in partnership with Abu Dhabi Maritime Awards. The awards will be done during the ceremony at the end of the Abu Dhabi International Boat Show. Everybody can participate, send your pictures, your best picture of raptors, your best picture of the wildlife around Abu Dhabi, and three adults categories, 1 youth category. The awardees will replace the picture that we have here in the corridors. So if you want to have your picture in our corridors for 1 year, please participate and send your pictures. Again, thank you so much. Oh yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing. The story I told you about X-26 and the female sacred falcon, on behalf of the Raptor Fund, it gives me immense pleasure to let you know that we're actually making a film about X-26 and her legacy that tells our entire story of the work and the success of our conservation efforts in Mongolia. It should be done by the end of the year, and hopefully there may be a chance for a screening maybe at some point, so we can talk about that.
Absolutely.
So okay, watch our website and sign up for our newsletter so you get more information.
All right. Thanks again for coming tonight, and see you next month.
Thank you.